Town vote, the Charlottetown Accord, that was an amazing recognition. It was simply a clarification of Section 35 in the Constitution around Aboriginal or Indigenous self-government, which set up, as I just said, Indigenous governments as they called it a third order of government. Who cares if it's first, second, or third, but it's at an equal level with the federal and provincial, and set up the mechanisms to do that. Had that vote passed, the federal government would have been the champion, had to have been, of that. Right now, the federal government is the champion of the colonial paradigm. The federal government, through the Indian Act, and through all their treaty negotiations and their treaty implementation efforts, is still denying, and trying to assimilate First Nations. That's all of their money, their $9 billion a year. All of their efforts are focused on that. I think Canadians should have something to say about that in the wake of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Yeah, I have a question here, Miles.
Right over here.
Okay.
I noted your earlier comment of not worrying about the time as long as you had the mic, and I'm one of the workshop leaders that's going to start sometime later today. The stuff I'm talking about, you're giving me an excellent introduction, and I want to ask you the question that another significant Supreme Court decision happened in very nearly the same time frame as the Chilcotian, and that was the Grassy Narrows in Ontario. And it made it clear that the Crown can be represented by the province. And in that case, the Aboriginal side had sought to continue to have federal jurisdiction. And the thing I'm going to be talking about in my workshop is the time has come to really try and shift much more jurisdiction to the provinces. And this, I think, would work better for two reasons. One, that the First Nations people across the country are not the same at all. Like you just said, the Nakota situation is different than yours, and in Eastern, they're all different. The other far more important thing is that the province controls all of the areas that create difficulties between First Nations and us. And I think it's just an accident of constitution making that at the time that the Constitution was made in 1867, almost all the country was still under federal control. And very quickly, the other provinces were formed, and the very important thing is that the Crown lands are now Crown lands of the province and not the feds. No federal government of any stripe will ever take the First Nations issue seriously, because they don't have enough skin in the game. You've got to negotiate with the government party that is impacted. And that's enough of a preamble to just see whether you would agree that, or comment on, that our success will be much better if more of the responsibility of the Crown is recognized to exist at the provincial level.
I believe that the provincial Crown has to be part of the Canadian Crown's place at the negotiation table. To leave them out is to leave out an important area of jurisdiction. So it's not realistic to leave them out. In the Chilcotin decision, what the Supreme Court of Canada did is created a cloud of uncertainty over the extent of the provincial jurisdiction over Chilcotin lands. So...
But there was no treaties in BC. That was a big...
No, there were no treaties, but when Canada and BC divided up Section 30, the heads of power, BC took all land and resources. That was one of their areas of jurisdiction. The Supreme Court of Canada cast a cloud of doubt over whether that's legitimate. It may still rest with the First Nation.
Yeah.
under Canadian law. So the point is, let's get down and sort that out through negotiations. Let's not have the courts have to sort that out. And you're bang on, this province has to be there. That's good. But I don't think you come there assuming any quantum, because the First Nations are going there saying the province doesn't have, we're not going to agree that the province has jurisdiction over all our lands. You know, we need to resort this. We need to sort this out by agreement. But that's Grassy Narrow's decision. It was quite mischievous, and I haven't quite figured that one out. But it did bring a bit of uncertainty as to what the enforceability under constitutional law is of the provincial head of power. That was in a treaty situation. In BC, we have no treaties, but it purported to create some clarity with those facts. But it just leaves up in the air what's the extent of legitimate political power. But you come out to BC and you talk to a BC Attorney General lawyer, they're absolutely clear. All those cases confirm that they still have jurisdiction over everything. They're not interested in negotiating. Although they did do joint decision making with us over all of our islands. You know, we agree with how provincial jurisdiction is exercised with respect to land and resources over all of Haida Gwaii. And they can come here there all they want and say they don't recognize our jurisdiction, but they implicitly did here. And how we start off those agreements is we identify, recognize each other as parties. The Haida Nation, the government of BC, in Canada's case it would be the government of Canada. And we say on matters of sovereignty, ownership, and jurisdiction, we draw a line down the center of the page. On the Haida side of the page, we write whatever we want. And of course, we say we own it all, lock, stock, and barrel. On Canada's side of the page, they write whatever they want. They say Canada owns it all, lock, stock, and barrel. Then we say, on these matters we disagree. Then we get on with the matters we agree on, like joint management. So that's an interim step. So we still have people of goodwill need to sit down and sort out those areas of lawmaking power. If we start extrapolating, and we're all going to do it, but figure out what the courts might say, it's just going to gum things up. But it's what we do. You know, the better thing would be to keep a vision of reconciliation and how we all want this relationship to play out. You know, okay.
Got a mic question over here with a mic first.
Somebody.
Yes, my question is, what kind of healing and growth do the Aboriginal Nation and people require to show that they will get the respect and reconciliation that you're asking for? What kind of healing and growth are the Aboriginal peoples having to show and to achieve this respect and reconciliation that you're describing?
Maybe some of the other Indigenous people in there can give examples from their perspective, but I'll tell you one example of that. And when we did in 2010, when we signed this cooperation, joint decision-making agreement between the provincial crown and the Haida Nation, BC pulled a surprise there. All the time, ever since I've been a political leader, I wouldn't talk to anybody if they called those islands Queen Charlotte Islands. If they wanted to sit down with me, they referred to it by its proper name, Haida Gwaii. And we never asked anybody to change the name or anything. We just said that's its proper name. But people who fought us or disagreed with us, you know, did kind of a ploy, they'd throw it in our face. when we signed this joint decision-making agreement, BC came to that ceremony with legislation that struck away the name Queen Charlotte Islands and formally instated Haida Gwaii. I'll tell you, there wasn't a dry eye, Haida eye in that place. That was more important to our elders and a lot of our people than the joint decision-making agreement. That's what I mean by recognition. And that's the beginning of healing. You know, there's still a lot of crap going on that we need to fix. But it's a start, and it shows seriousness. You know, it shows respect. And there's examples, you know, I noticed Canada picked up what the United States has been doing for quite some time on the waters between Vancouver Island and the mainland. They renamed them formally the Salish Sea. Big step to those people. You know, that's recognition, that's respect, that's the beginning of healing. Didn't cost anybody much. Anyway, that's how I'd answer that.
Thank you. Bill, just wondering how we're going to sort out a lot of these land claims. I go to British Columbia as a classic example of the problem. A few years ago, the land claims were all of the different groups in British Columbia were delineated. Yours would have been among that number, and yours was quite simple in view of the fact that most of it was sitting offshore on islands. But when they put all this stuff together, they found that 150% of the land area of British Columbia had been claimed. So there were a whole pile of conflicting native claims sitting out there. And I guess the question was, how is the government of Canada or the province of British Columbia going to negotiate all of that stuff when there's a lot of conflict among the native groups themselves as to who owned what, or who, was legitimately able to justify that claim.
That's a senseless and mischievous proposition.
No,
How can you claim 150% of something?
Sir, exactly, that's the whole thing. How do you claim that? And that was actually done, sir.
Well,
I saw the article.
There was obviously some unresolved disputes.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying.
But to say it's 150% is ridiculous.
I know it is ridiculous. I agree with you. And that's what the Canadian public were
No,
saying.
but it's not true. I mean, it's not a fact. I mean, there's only 100% of the land there.
I'm sorry.
I was the referee for this.
These were overlapping claims, and
you're reiterating the speaking notes of those who've been fighting treaties since day one, and they've had their way, but
no, I don't believe so, sir.
We're all treaty people.
Yeah,
We're all treaty people.
yeah.
And have we been following the treaties? As
Yes.
white people, have we been living into right relationship with treaty people?
You're into another whole area, sir.
Yeah, it's the same area.
No, it isn't. It isn't.
But I hear your point, and I know what your point is, but your characterization of it, I think, has an agenda and is mischievous. In my eyes, maybe not in everybody's eyes.
No, but
there are areas over time, and this happens over time. I mean, Canada has overlaps with the United States. You know, you ever hear that saying, 54-40 or fight, or, the line between right up here and Dixon Entrance. There's been battles out there. There's lots of overlap disputes in the world. This isn't the only place.
I'm
And,
just
after
asking you how we're going to resolve that situation?
Okay, good question. Very good
That
question.
was what I was trying to.
Much more constructive.
Rudely interrupted over here.
How we do that is to recognize each of the First Nations and to bring them together. And this is the question in front of the treaty process in BC right now. If you read last year's annual report, I had an article in there with 2 past chief commissioners on that very issue. And what we did is we talked about, contemplated how we can address this so-called overlaps issue. And it means sitting down, treating each of those nations in a respectful way, recognizing that they do have, that they claim similar territories, get to the nature of that difference and facilitate them to resolution. In my time, I've facilitated some of those resolutions, and it wasn't anything more than recognizing their nationhood, sitting down in a feast situation, which is their tradition, and having them recognize that they're neighbors, they're relatives, and because they all had to run to the federal and provincial government and belly up to the table and get recognition for who had rights to what, they both claimed them absolutely. But when they looked at each other in their own feast house according to their own protocols, you know, one person would say, "Of course I recognize that you have jurisdiction over that area, but because of my grandfather from 3 generations ago, I have the right to dig clams there. That's why when I go in there to dig clams, I bring you a bucket to acknowledge that I'm acknowledging that this is your area, but I have the right to dig." And then it's resolved. Another one, it's not true that the Haida Nation didn't have any overlaps. One of our neighbors, the Heltsuk, which is on the mainland side of us, our ocean areas, we didn't call it overlap, we call it intermingled. And so we went out and we resurrected a 160-year-old treaty, and we said, we delineated that area and said, there, we share this area. Our boundary isn't about separating us. Our boundary is where we join as nations, and it was a beautiful thing we're still feasting at. But you do it on their terms, not as a competition with the Crown. And thank you for indulging me. I just wanted to make a point there. Very good question. Thank you.
This will be the last question before workshops, break for workshops. There'll be another bear pit this afternoon.
Miles, thank you very much for clarifying some of that sharing. It seems to me that we, from within the dominant, somewhat oppressive Canadian legal structure, can learn something about the idea of land use from our First Nations elders here. And we've brought over some pretty impoverished tools from Europe for understanding how we use land. And in the 1700s, in Britain, we brought over the idea of exclusive property rights that John Locke wrote up. And you're suggesting the 2 big things here in your earlier remarks and just now. One is that we have to think about land use, not in terms of an English-defined terms, but in terms of some older knowledge that is here on the land and retained by people who have deep understanding of what it means to share. And once we understand that, we can overcome some of these supposed conflicts that were spoken of when people start adding up territory. But and then you've also referred to treaties that are old and predate our treaties among First Nations themselves. We have some here in the valley, here between Tanaha, Shuswap, and Nakota that go back before the parks. Could you, though, tell us one thing about your earlier remarks, which were, we have to get this reconciliation piece with the land? And haven't you in Haida Gwaii endeavored to protect half of your lands? Isn't there a sense that nature needs half in your lands? And can you give us a sense of how that has emerged? There's a similar effort among the Decho, I understand. And so I'd love to know how pervasive that is across the land.
Well, you've been doing your research. Let me go back to your first title being collective or individual. You know, that's the English common law way of individual interest as opposed to the public interest and individual holding of property. Aboriginal, and this is I think one of the brilliant things that the Supreme Court of Canada did, is that my title, Haida title, is not held by me as an individual. My title is held by all of my people collectively. Like my family, which lives just under that Jock there, that's my village, Jock and Kaisun. We have a responsibility, an elevated responsibility from a Tanu person to look after our area. But all our title is Haida title, and it's not just held by my generation. That title is owned every bit as importantly by 30 generations down the road. And I don't have, under Canadian law, I don't have the right to alienate it from a future generation. I love that part of it. I mean, somebody was listening to us. And it's different from English common law, and I think we can strike a new balance, but accepting a sense of responsibility and advocating for the public good is something that's got way skewed out of proportion. And even economists aren't the boogeymen, but their trade and their modeling and all that has become so much in the service of those who hire them, of private interests, that the public interest suffers almost every time. And I think it's a major problem we're facing. So I think in this treaty negotiation in Canada, we can find a new balance. And I think that's a really important opportunity. About nature needs half. You know, when we were drawing up our land use plans, it was in our face. Our islands were gutted. You know, it was just, as one Nishka leader put it, it was just, you look out the window like this, all you'd see is a sea of rotten stumps. The forests were almost gone. So it wasn't a matter of protecting half. We protected every damn stick that was left that we could. You know, recognizing that our people were loggers too, and that the logging industry was important to them. And if we just said shut down logging tomorrow, we would have been thrown out of office. So we had to draw balance there. But we were very inspired by Herb Norwegian and the Decho. Herb coined that term, nature needs half. And you know, it's become, in the absence of detailed land use plans, it's a good rule of thumb.
We're shut you down now, Bob.
Okay.
Just for get us more energy.
And I want to thank everybody for the vigorous discussion. You know, I came here to stir it up. I came here to have a vigorous debate, and I just want some action out of here. I want to move forward constructively, and you know, the only way we're going to do it is to do it together. Thank you for your time.